Okay. Welcome, Deepa. I see you there as well. So I'm Jeralyn Brossfield, and I am excited to get to share what MeRT has done in our lives. My husband, Robert, manages our clinic. I think he's going to be on here. He's just trying to not make an echo in how he joins us. But he really is our business manager, and that opportunity has been fantastic for us because I can do the doctoring and Robert can do the business management. And that's been huge. So he's joining us, and I think that'll allow you to ask some questions about the business management side that he's better equipped to answer. Welcome, Erica. I am going to move for just a moment to a PowerPoint, and then I'm also going to show you a brief video of our clinic so you can see what a setup looks like in person. So let me share my screen. Essentially, I started in functional medicine. I started my training while I was still working for our medical center, running the Wellness Institute at our medical center. And that gave me a great opportunity to do all my training, all my modules. And then when I opened my own private practice and fully left the hospital, I did not have a MeRT clinic at that time. I had a functional medicine clinic. I still have a functional medicine clinic called Exo Health. I spend about 32 hours of my week in Exo Health. That's Robert that just joined us. Wave, Robert, so they know who you are if you want. I think he can't hear me yet, but he's got the picture of the New Yorker behind him. So starting my functional medicine practice has continued to be a phenomenal way to offer patients the option of adding MeRT to their treatment protocol. But it also is a scenario where I've run those two clinics as separate entities business-wise, and that lets me flex the amount of work I do in either clinic in whichever way I choose going forward. And it has also allowed us the advantages of insurance billing under a group NPI number on our MeRT clinic side that I don't utilize on my functional medicine clinic side. So for opening a MeRT clinic, the first thing I just want to mention is that I have some affiliations I want to disclose, just because I think when we've made posts, for instance, in our tribe group or on Facebook, I think it's important that we let people know if we have affiliations with these groups we're representing. I am a licensee of Wave Neuroscience. That's how I run my MeRT clinic. I'll explain more what that means. I was contracted to go to the AFM, or excuse me, the IFM AIC as a exhibitor. So they paid me to go and be on the floor running that booth for the week. And then I also have an affiliate agreement that if anyone opens a clinic that if I've brought that physician to Wave, they actually offer, there's a referral bonus that I receive. So I just want to be clear that those things do exist so that you know I have those conflicts of interest. In the simplest form, when people ask me what MeRT is, because it's an odd terminology, it doesn't exist outside of our clinic network. And our clinic network, when I started in 2019, was only 12 clinics. It's now about 100 clinics. And that includes outside of the United States. So we have a clinic in Santiago, Chile, one in Taiwan, one in Australia, another one, I think, in Panama. And so this is a worldwide network of clinics that are all part of the parent company called Wave Neuroscience that I'm going to explain. But in its simplest form, I think of MeRT as EEG-guided brain stimulation that uses external energy to help the brain neurons make more connections. Technically, MeRT stands for, the M is magnetic EEG-guided resonance therapy. So MeRT is the trademarked name for this EEG-guided version. You could think of EEG-guided TMS is another way that it's described. And in the literature, there is all kinds of ways this is described. It can be called STMS. It can be called EEG-guided TMS. A lot of the literature that I provided at conference, which is something I can send out to any of you on this Zoom, is really talking about how there's a benefit to taking traditional TMS therapy, which is very cookie cutter in its approach. Traditional TMS treats every single person at the same location on their brain at F3 right here. It treats everyone at 10 hertz. So the same brain speed is guided from that treatment. And it treats everyone at 120% of motor threshold, which is a strong enough voltage to cause you to spasm with each treatment train. And MeRT MeRT personalizes each one of those features. So we personalize the location. We treat at 80% of motor threshold, and thus there's a limiting factor like bipolar or a seizure disorder. We treat at a lower intensity in those conditions. And we also write the protocol. Wave Neuro writes the protocol to be individualized to the person. So if Robert, who's on the call with us, if his brain speed is 11.4 hertz, it's going to be that his treatment protocol is going to be built to optimize that speed instead of 10 hertz, which would be what TMS would do. Just briefly to review, the brain is constantly making brain waves at all different frequencies. Delta is common with deep sleep, and our brain is only utilizing about 4 cycles per second when we're in deep sleep. Theta is a speed that is more common with light sleep or feeling drowsy or zoned out, and our brain is functioning 4 to 8 times per second when we're in theta. Alpha is really where we probably all are mostly right now at this time. We're awake, we're at choice. We could glaze over and zone out, or we could become really focused. And if we moved into high focus, it would be beta, where our brain speed is more like 13 to 30 hertz. So sort of the secret sauce that both I became super excited when I did my training because it made physics come to life, which I never knew I liked physics before, but essentially the fast Fourier transform formulas get used taking an EEG that, you know, typically is going to be 12 to 15 pages of squiggles from all over the head. And Wave Neuro has created an AI algorithm that makes it into this kind of a picture. So this is an ideal form. This is a person who does not have a concussion, does not have a severe diagnosis, doesn't have severe anxiety or OCD or any diagnostic problem. But you can see that in this picture, these 3 peaks are lined up on top of each other. So the frontal region is represented at the top. The central region is represented in the middle. I'm going to ask anyone to mute who may not be muted. And then the posterior region is in the back here at the bottom of the screen. So these 3 regions are showing that the predominant brain speed in those regions is the same in all regions. That means it's coherent. It's like the brain is all on one channel. And in this case, the brain speed is approximately 11 hertz. That's where this peak is centered over. So that's what we typically would see in an ideal EEG. And we know that with life and or age, and I would say age equals life events, and I often say life is a degrading event. So we know that brain speeds can slow down from lots of different things. This is just a graph showing us that the brain speed slows down with age. It doesn't have to, and that's one of the key points with treating mild cognitive impairment is you may have a person who has a brain speed of 7 hertz that can be healed to have a brain speed again at say 9 hertz or 10 hertz if that was their underlying brain speed. So within functional medicine, we know from looking at root causes that aging is not like the clock is going to go on, but the degradation of our body is not a mandate. And we have lots of things we can do within functional medicine that promote good health. And I would say MeRT is something that allows us to replace or regain coherence and speed that has been lost because of severe impacts of life, injuries that have occurred in life. We often see, this is a very typical pattern that we see in our clinic. We redo an EEG every 10 treatments. So this is a woman who's 22. She was an Olympic swimmer. On her first EEG, this one on the left, you can see that her frontal and central brain speeds have centered at about 6 hertz. And so when we see the injury that she incurred from her concussion, you can see if I were to draw a line down the speed that her frontal region is now functioning at, it's functioning at 6 hertz, which her original brain speed, you can see here, because it's preserved posteriorly in most people, was really a little faster than 10. It might have even been like a 10.4. So after her concussion, the symptoms of brain fog, lack of clarity, difficulty with communication were occurring because her brain speed is happening at almost half of what she really should be functioning at. After 2 weeks of treatment, you can see that she's regained frontal and central function at a little faster than 10 hertz here on the right-hand side. Now that's faster than I see in most of our patients. She was 22, she's an athlete. I think she had, a lot of other good things going for her that allowed her to heal quickly. But that is the transition that we see with MeRT treatment, whether it's in 2 weeks or 6 weeks, which would be 30 treatments. We see this regain of function and coherence where the brain speed is all working on the same channel. And that yields a person's experience being that they're focused, they can communicate, they feel clear, they're not anxious, and they feel really good. TJ, do you have a question? Go ahead and unmute if you do.
Yes. So is it necessary for the patient to have a treatment every day in sequence? Or if they say they're traveling, for treatment, if they come in and do a week and then they have to go back and then they come in, is it that it's optimal to do it daily, or is it necessary to do it daily?
It's optimal, not necessary. So in most of our patients, we try to encourage at least what I call clumping, right? So if I can get 10 treatments in a row, which is 2 weeks, that's great. Like that's ideal. And many people will work with them around their schedules. And I have a few people, I've had a boxer who needed to be out of town 2 days a week. And so we would treat 3 days a week and he would leave for 2 days a week. It takes longer, obviously, to get through his 30 treatments. But in an ideal sense, you do it daily, and it's like compounding interest in the bank. It's better to do it daily, but it still has benefit even if you have to do it in more sporadic fashion or with a break because of a vacation or children's school events or things like that. We commonly work with adjustments to the treatment protocol.
Is it, at the cellular level, is it basically helping reset the transmembrane potential?
Yeah, in fact, there's a beautiful article, and I'll try to send out to everybody on the call the literature reports because I set them up into a summary where there's one sentence about each citation, so you can kind of see what's interesting to you to look up. But one of the things that was fascinating to me is that really the guideline, we pride ourselves using this technology in personalizing the frequency that we're going to treat at based on the brain EEG and the EKG. And we're working with harmonics and trying to find a time when the gated potentials are actually open, right? So if you imagine both of those two neurons on either side of the synaptic cleft having a moment in time that they're the most susceptible, the most impressionable, and it's going to be the moment when they're ready to fire and receive that synaptic action potential moving across the cleft. So we're trying to meet that spot when we're dialing in the person's treatment protocol. A very simple way I sometimes explain it to patients, if they understand positive and negative charge, is that neurotransmitters flood the spaces between our synaptic clefts or between the two cells in our brain. And if during that time I can bring in, if I can pull with a magnetic charge or magnetic field, if I can pull a frequency, if I can pull a whole bunch of positive charges into that space that make that action potential literally have a bridge to walk across to the next neuron and connect them, that's what we're doing with every treatment pulse. And when a person is sitting in the chair getting their 35 minutes of treatment, they're receiving 1,800 nudges, 1,800 pulses saying, do you want to work with me at 10.4 hertz? Do you want to work with me at 10.4 hertz? And the brain starts to entrain those neurons to fire together, which we then wire together. And so we create brand new pathways through damaged tissue or between regions of the brain because of that entrainment together. So yeah, it's both mathematical and chemical and electrical. And what I love is it's doing that all without a medication. So we're doing it through the natural methodology of the brain. common experiences when patients go through treatment is people across the board. This list are things that I think everybody says. So people talk about sleep improving. This is a treatment for insomnia, but whether you're coming for insomnia or not, people get better sleep. There's an improved quantity of deep sleep if you're tracking your sleep, like on your Oura Ring or any of your wearables. So better deep sleep, decreased anxiety, a sense of calm or ease in accomplishing tasks, a lot more thinking before reacting. In Robert and I, as a couple or other couples we've treated, we find we're nicer to each other just because we're less reactive, less bitey a little bit with the stresses of life. People that are athletes will talk about the ball coming at them more slowly. Like you can imagine if I'm getting 11 pictures of a tennis ball coming at me and I have more time to get my racket back, my reaction time is faster. It's not that the ball comes more slowly, it's that you're getting more input. And more energy and motivation. There's a distinct increase in dopamine while patients are treating that's a beneficial feeling for people. And we have a lot of people who say, oh, I got up and cleaned my gutters out, or I've done things that I have had on my list for a long time. Let me see who else is in the chat with another question. Hang on. Erica, are there scales you do during treatment to measure symptoms? Yes. And they really vary, as you can imagine, Erica. One of the things Robert has really felt about this group, and we're thinking we want to create some method where we can all talk with each other, whether that's a WhatsApp group or something, because this is a scenario where we're doing this because of the concept of all boats rise with the tide. All of us sharing our experience and knowledge is going to make us better for our patients and offer more support to a world that is really desperate in the mental health and wellness world. So Erica, we do use scales. We use the PHQ-9 most commonly for our depression patients. We use a GAD-7 for our anxiety patients. We have played with different autism scales. There are several of them, and some of them are really difficult to use. So we're still trying to optimize which autism scale we use. And in fact, somebody that I talked to at conference had I think it was Sharon Cohen-Hausman or Hausman-Cohen that started Intellex DNA. She had some good insights. I was like, oh my gosh, we've got to get our heads together because they're using some scales I think we can use. But yes, we do use scales. We have been using Brain Check. That's an easy on an iPad test for people to do pre and post. CNS vital signs is another one that we use sometimes because of our Bredesen protocol patients. So we have some pre-post data in the CNS vital signs world. So yes, scales are really helpful. It's an area, honestly, that we all as physicians could help Wave Neuro understand better which scales are going to work better for us in the clinical setting. The conditions that we treat, even though I wouldn't say that we are making claims about each diagnosis, but these are common things that drive patients to our practice. I would say in our clinic, probably anxiety and autism might be our top two treatment types. We certainly have patients we treat for depression, patients we treat for memory loss. Because I'm a Bredesen Recode provider, I have a lot of patients that come through, and after they've done the Bredesen protocol for a while, we'll put them into MeRT treatment and they'll regain brain speed. But really, the beauty of this work is that it's treating the entire brain network, not just a diagnosis. So we're not treating one location that's the depression location. We're actually treating a network. And I don't know if any of you saw an article recently in Medscape that talked about 5 or 6 of the top psychiatric diagnoses sharing the same nodes in the brain network. And I thought that is exactly explanatory for why this works, is we are treating the whole network, not just one region. This is a slide that shows MeRT success compared to the status quo treatment for different diagnoses. So when we look at success rates using MeRT treatment for, say, depression versus just medication or versus just RTMS, we have a 78% success rate versus RTMS being at 31%. For sleep, a much higher success rate. You can see the red bar is MeRT across the board. Anxiety, which would be comparing therapy plus medications. Again, 67% as compared to 33%. TBI and concussion, 57% reduction of symptoms compared to RTMS for concussion symptoms, and then PTSD compared to plain TMS. And recognize that RTMS or regular TMS is not approved or paid for by insurance for things like PTSD or TBI. It can be used for them, it's just not as successful because it's not as personalized. Let me just check our questions here for a moment. Oh, good. I'm going to introduce James here in a moment, who's our physician liaison at Wave Neuro, and he'll be helpful with this next part of our discussion in particular. So the MeRT process, I think at conference, one of the things that was confusing to people is we were doing EEGs on about 50 physicians and practitioners who came through our booth. And so people were like, well, is this an EEG company? And while an EEG is part of what we do, it is the foundation that differentiates our treatment from RTMS. It is also not the whole sum of our treatment. So when we look at the MeRT process, the qEEG is sort of the starting point. And so we start with, sorry, I'm just reading a couple of the questions here. We start actually with the qEEG, then we do medical review. So I do a review of each patient's EEG with them. That takes me about a half hour to 45 minutes, depending on how much I get into their medical history. And then if they're a candidate, we set them up for daily 35-minute treatments. And in most cases, we sort of advise the patient or help them understand that 30 treatments is going to be the usual amount we would expect for them to do. And that's a 6 weeks amount of treatment. Those results are durable unless they have a neurocognitive decline type disease, like Parkinson's, for instance, is a good example where if they stop treatment, they may regress. We are having great success with maintenance of the success in our Parkinson's patients if they maintain some amount of treatment. I would say the same thing can be true with Alzheimer's patients if we don't have a defined reason for their Alzheimer's that we've corrected. I'm going to take a couple questions here. Can I compare and contrast neurofeedback and MeRT? My understanding is that neurofeedback entrains neurons to fire together through a teaching method. Exactly true. I think the biggest difference between neurofeedback and MeRT, they both use a qEEG as their basis. The difference is the strength of the power of the treatment. Neurofeedback, I would tell you, is like meditation on steroids. Like, it's much stronger than meditation in its effect, and it does entrain neurons to fire together through the brain, repetitively practicing getting into a brain state. However, what I have not seen neurofeedback do, and I ran a neurofeedback clinic, I set neurofeedback up in our hospital actually and ran that for 3 years. What I've never seen it do is entrain new resumption of alpha speed. In other words, it hasn't taken a person whose brain speed is at 5 and regained their brain speed at 11, for instance. So the power that MeRT can provide is really the biggest difference. I think of them on a spectrum. So if we were going to put meditation on the least invasive, non-invasive side of the spectrum, and MeRT is not invasive, but it is using electricity. So if we used meditation on one end of the spectrum, put neurofeedback up another 20% into the spectrum, I would put MeRT somewhere up at 80% in the treatment strength, comparatively to 20% being neurofeedback. Nate, you're asking, am I seeing patients reduce or eliminate medications during and after treatment? Yes. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm an OBGYN by training, and certainly any physician who is an MD or DO can do this work. But what I am seeing is that if I have patients who are on psychiatric medications or, the whole gamut, whether that's antidepressants and or benzodiazepines and anxiety medications, I generally am going to work with their physician that is managing those medications. I'm not trying to take them on full bore as a patient in my MeRT clinic. If they choose to become my functional medicine patient, that's a different story, and that's where I do testing and much more in-depth cross coverage for patients. But in the medication world, usually we don't change their medicines when they start MeRT, but we know, and I tell them, as we go through this process, you are probably not going to need your medicine as much. So we're going to start right off by letting your physician know this is the next steps of where we're at in your process. And if your physician can help you decrease your medications. Let me just ask somebody to mute that I just started hearing. Thank you. That your psychiatrist or your primary care physician may be able to help you remove those medications. I'll often say it looks like we're seeing signs that you should be able to start reducing your medications, and I'll send a message or they'll get in contact with their physician. So a mini story, someone close in our family, our daughter actually had a panic disorder and anxiety disorder for the year prior to me learning about MeRT. She was treated by the physician who trained me, and within 6 weeks was tapered off of all of her medications by her psychiatrist after having been on them for a year. And she really had durable results for about 3 years, and then began having, I would say, some breakthrough with anxiety and ADD type symptoms, came home and did 3 more weeks of MeRT. And so when we look at, what's going on, in her case, it lasted for about 3 years. I've subsequently learned and figured out, based on looking at her EEG in the next round of MeRT treatment, that she was likely to have had a mold exposure. And in fact, mold was a present factor for her, which I think probably was part of that recurrence of her anxiety. So, we have a huge benefit, I would say, as functional physicians, that we are going to see cause and effect in a way that's different than some physicians. So you're going to learn patterning in an EEG that's going to tell you this patient has an MTHFR mutation. They might have trouble with detox. Or there's a pattern that's very common when I see people having mold or Lyme type illness. So that's helpful because you're going to have things to offer as to root cause, as to why is this brain out of decline that traditional medicine docs are not going to have. And so, Chris, I'm going to look at one more question here. I have a qEEG that I could briefly show that I would use? Yes, I'm going to show you some pictures here in just a minute. I think that'll answer that question, Chris. So MeRT process, this is a patient receiving treatment. I'm going to show you a couple pictures from our clinic. This is a patient getting an EEG. Those of you that were at conference saw us using a dry cap that looks more like this. The dry cap has an advantage of never having to put gel in the hair. So each of these they're very soft rubber prongs in this dry cap are going to collect electricity at 19 places on the head. If we're using a wet cap, which is this picture in my clinic, you can see that our tech is placing gel in each of the leads on the scalp. And this person is all set up with an EEG, an EKG lead in this chest strap, and then we're putting gel in all 19 spots on the head. This is a picture of the 1020 map that we use for the locations that we're taking in voltage information during the EEG. And after this EEG is optimized, literally on the screen, your tech will be able to see that all the leads look like they are connected. Then we dim the lights and we take an awake EEG with the eyes closed for 10 minutes in this room. Let me see what the next question is. Nate, no problem. I know you had to run. That's fine. And I'll send the Zoom out.
How many points did you say the cap was? Was it a 19?
It's a 19 channel with 2 ear clips and an EKG lead. And I'm going to just out myself. Robert and James, who are both on the call, do EEGs. I don't do the EEGs. So guys, if you have something to say, if I say it wrong about how many channels we're picking up, but it's a 19 channel EEG. I welcome your input. So the difference, and you'll come to see when I look at the pricing for how to start a clinic, if you set this system up, which is a DayMed EEG box, essentially, that's going to collect the information, amplify it, and send it to the computer, that's one option, and it's your lesser expensive option. And when we treat children, we need this kind of a cap. This is our tech doing an EEG on a child who's seated on their mother's lap. This is commonly how we do an EEG on our autistic kids. It is not unheard of that we're holding their arms or that we're putting a cotton ball over their eyes and saying this is a game of keeping our eyes closed with cotton on top of our eyes. You know, we make up all kinds of things to in some way get segments of an EEG on a child. But if you're going to do children in your clinic, you need this type of a setup where you have this cap with gel. We call it the wet cap or the gel cap. If you're doing adults only, you could go to a dry cap option, which means you don't have to have gel. And the difference between those two systems is about $5,000 if you're purchasing them. So this system for the dry cap is $10,000, excuse me, $20,000. The system for a wet cap, like we're doing for this person in the chair or the child, is more like 15,000, maybe a little less, depending on, you know, the deal you can strike with Daymed that makes that equipment. So we collect the EEG. The EEG gets sent back to our parent company, who runs it through their AI algorithm and also has a human EEG lab that looks at the EEG and confirms the information for the protocol. The protocol gets sent back to us, and this is a picture of our treatment room with our tech doing a treatment. This is one of our mild cognitive impairment in an early Alzheimer's patient. So the treatment comes back already made for you. So literally it is dialed into the system. You push a button that says start after you've positioned the coil, which is inside of this black device next to the patient's head. The coil gets positioned based on what our tech is seeing in the protocol. It tells you where to put the coil, and it tells you how to set the machine, and then you push start. So one of the fears that I had when I looked at this, and what some of you have expressed to me, is that, oh my God, how am I going to learn how to create these protocols? The beauty is you don't have to. Like, you're not going to be creating the protocol. In fact, I would advise you against creating the protocol. I would advise you to collaborate with Wave Neuro about the protocol if you have questions. So for instance, I have some patients that have been stroke patients and maybe have had the region of the middle cerebral artery kind of wiped out from their stroke. And we've moved the coil location to be over the stroke region after I have consulted with the lab at our parent company at Wave Neuro. Or if we have reasons that we think we need to move the coil, I've had a patient with an implanted plate in their head, and I didn't want to treat right over a metal plate and heat it up, for instance. So we adjusted the coil location based on that. So I would say the lab is incredibly receptive and workable and will work with you. You are the clinician in this case. You are the safety holder for your clinic. And so, you know, I always collaborate with the lab, get them to help us change the protocol, and then we enact it in our clinic. We are very against, I would say, being cowboys in this field. This is not the place to go experiment with, oh, I wonder what would happen if I treated over here. You can do harm. And we are really relying on what is now the largest database of patients' EEGs within our company. And that history, that experience, I trust implicitly to guide me and help me as a resource. Let me just see. TJ, did you have a question?
Yes. Along those lines with the metal plate, totally understandable for not wanting to do it there. I'm wondering about the field size and strength for people who maybe were metal workers or were exposed and may have some metal fragments like in the eyes.
Wow. James, have you ever encountered that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We actually had somebody who had, I'm James, by the way, I work for Wave Neuro.
James is my lifeline and Robert's lifeline. He saves us. Like, our tech who's in this picture got COVID. James was at our clinic the next day and kept us running for the week. That is a service with Wave Neuro.
Yeah, but to answer the fragment in metal, we see a lot of veterans. So I'm going to use that experience. I had a guy that had some shrapnel just to the left side of his left. And it was a small little piece, but he had to have it removed in order to go through treatment, because safety is like our #1 priority. He probably would have been okay, but we just don't take any chances.
Great. So,
Robert,
and you said you saw a lot of veterans. Does TRICARE cover this, or is it an out-of-pocket expense for the veterans?
James, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, another great question. TRICARE does cover this. We have a few locations that are credentialed with TRICARE that they are getting reimbursed.
And TJ, that's a great question. We should come back to maybe about insurance in a little bit, because
Yeah.
it's a whole different ballgame to talk about. But it is like we have been running since May of 2019. Over that time period, Robert, I think, would you say we've billed insurance for 3 patients?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Just a few, for sure.
Yeah, just a couple. And we are now actually pursuing insurance credentialing under a group NPI that I've created with a group of physicians. But you can do both. You can bill insurance and then still do cash pay, because insurance is not covering for all the other diagnostic classifications. They're only covering for MDD and OCD. And so, you can do both. And that's often a question. People have a lot of worry that patients are going to be able to pay these fees. I'm going to go over the fees here in a moment. What we have found is that where there's a will, there's a way. And when people understand the benefit they can incur with this, they want to work with it and they want to try to make it work. Robert, I was going to ask you also to just describe briefly our work with the people that have implanted devices for their hearts.
Yeah. Yes. So I guess that's more of a tricky question. I know some clinics won't do that. We've treated a few, and we've worked directly with the rep. We've had a rep come out. They've brought in equipment. We've set up the patient just like in the photo that's on the screen now, and the rep has monitored the device to make sure there's no interference. Has given us a printout saying there's no interference, and we put that in a chart and had the patient sign basically an agreement.
Informed
around.
consent.
Yeah, exactly. So, we've had really good success with those patients. We've had a minister from Alabama who had a heart attack in a severe anoxic event. He repeated himself constantly, had no order of operations, couldn't pour a cup of coffee. He could drink it, but he didn't know, does a cup come first or do I get the pot? He couldn't do basic things. Repeated himself constantly. He was told he would never drive or do anything again. And that was about a year and a half ago. He's home now. He probably could still use more treatment, but today he is driving. He's working again. He's very lucid. He's not the same guy he was before, but he lives a completely independent life. But before he was treated, he couldn't do that. We have another patient we're treating right now who, after about 6 months, was dragging both his feet, and literally about the middle of the second week, got up from his treatment and started walking heel toe for the first time in 6 months. So sometimes we see those connections just take off right away. Some are more of a slow burn, but those patients, being willing to treat them and go through the process of bringing the rep out, having the courage to do that, that's up to the individual doctor. But we've seen some really great results for those patients.
Our main concern in those settings has just been that we not deactivate or impair the defibrillators or any of their devices. And there's a general rule of distance. So, and Chris, yeah, you mentioned in the chat, if the devices are cleared for an MRI, is it safe for this? Yes, that's exactly right. So that's also the answer for a plate in the head, for instance, or even fragments of metal. That would be the same type of questionnaire for the patient as far as MRI. You can use that rule of thumb of MRI safeness being an acceptable rule for MeRT. And then the other thing that I mentioned is distance. Often if it's a defibrillator that's implanted in the chest, that makes a difference because it's far enough from where we're treating that we're in a safe zone. I'm going to go back, Erica, to your question. I think you're asking about insurance, that insurance covers, so insurance will reimburse for major drug-resistant depression, and each insurance company is different in how many drugs you have to have failed to qualify. And then also OCD is covered by most insurance plans as well. So those are sort of the two or the 2 diagnoses that you can get coverage for. Libby, thank you for your feedback here. Yes, you think there are 2 or 3 ICD-10 codes that qualify and require failure of multiple meds. Exactly. So let's come back to insurance, because it is an add-on that you can choose to do, and it can be a really lovely thing, because we're in unlike other insurance reimbursement, I think we're in a honeymoon period right now where insurance is reimbursing actually more than what we're charging cash in a lot of situations. So it's a good thing to utilize if you can. And it requires all the things that billing insurance requires. It requires either knowing how to do it or having a biller. Oh, perfect, Libby. You were doing your homework. She says she spoke to a local TMS doc last week, so she knew that. Yeah, exactly. So there is some reimbursement possible if you choose to do that. So I'm going to shift a little bit more now to what would you need to know if you want to do this in your clinic. I've been trying to sort of show what we do in our clinic, because we have a variety of understanding about that. James is here partly because I want you guys to meet him, and I want you to know that he's a real human being you can write with any question or any interest in how you look at this. And at the end of our Zoom, I've got his email and Ashley's email that we can put up. But I would just want to explain the players in this, because it can get a little bit confusing. Who is Wave Neuro? So Wave Neuroscience is a neuroscience company. And I could see my typo there. Sorry, I missed a word. Company utilizing digital neuroimaging, so the qEEG, with computational neuroanalytics. That's the system that Wave Neuro now holds patents on, aligning EEG to guiding treatment through a TMS machine. And then neuromodulation is the TMS treatment to optimize brain function. This approach has been researched and developed through 2 main modalities. Wave Neuroscience has licenses clinics to use these 2 modalities. So MeRT is the magnetic EEG guided resonance therapy. That is using a class 2 medical device. It is the treatment I've been showing you the pictures of. There is a second line that has just come out, or is coming out in, currently, called Sonal. That is, I have not put pictures into this presentation, but Sonal is a home unit that does not require physician oversight. It does require an EEG to create the protocol. So what it does is allow you as a physician, or even clinics that maybe aren't doing MeRT, to have a methodology to let people do a home device that is much more gentle. I would tell you it's more on the speed as far as how strong it is to neurofeedback. Like, it's a little bit more like having a cap you put on your head daily for 30 minutes. And you can choose, 4 to 7 days a week with Sonal. And it allows for a clinic to have a whole group of patients out there that you could almost think of filling the funnel, because all of the people that are doing Sonal may not need MeRT, but when you're evaluating which device they're a better candidate for, you're going to end up filling some of the MeRT slots, and then you'll have another group of people maybe doing a performance device in their own home. Or we are starting to use it to some degree for maintenance in some patients as well. So it's sort of a separate product line you can choose to add or not. And we're just now in our clinic starting to do it. We have 2 patients using the Sonal devices in their homes. They're both patients who completed at least 30 treatments in our clinic and then are using Sonal over the summer while they're away, or in one of our autistic adults. He's using Sonal because when he's treating, he's just able to maintain an even mood, more so than when he is not treated. And in some ways, it's almost, I think it's a dopamine response for him that Sonal provides. I'm going to just check the chat here because there's a couple more questions. Dickran's asking, am I familiar with transcranial photobiomodulation, and where would I place it in my treatment continuum? Marvin Berman is a principal in the Neuronic company that makes the NeuroRadiant 1070. I'm going to have to say I don't know is the best answer I can tell you on that, Dickran. I do think transcranial photobiomodulation, everything I have read about it, is it's stronger than neurofeedback. Like, it's a more it is inputting energy into the brain, right? Through vision and through the photobiomodulation. So yeah, I would say that it's probably stronger than neurofeedback, although neurofeedback, you can choose if you're going to use a visual versus an auditory cue with neurofeedback. So there's some similarity. I might call it like neurofeedback with PEMF, right? I don't know if some of you that have looked at neurofeedback realize that there's a version where you can add in magnetic impulses. And I think the photobiomodulation has a similarity to adding a magnetic impulse to neurofeedback. So I'm not an expert, though, in comparing those. Chris is asking, am I leasing the Sonal to them, and what if they lose it or break it? James or Robert, I'm happy for you to answer that. It is a lease arrangement. James?
Yeah, we would, it's a lease to the clinic, and then you guys as the clinic would, have an agreement with the client stating if something happens or it breaks, they would be liable. But from a Wave perspective, if something happens to it on our end, we'll just replace it, and we'll take back the damaged Sonal and fix it.
Robert and I were laughing the other day saying, because one of the models that Wave is starting to do is to have a Sonal lab or Sonal lounge. And in fact, our name, Brain Care Performance Center, is part of a portion of Wave Neuro, or a version of how you can use the Wave Neuro branding, I guess is the right term, to promote your clinic. We wanted to use that version because it's actually had crowd focus studies, or I'm not using the right terminology, but checking it out in the public to say which terminology is which brand is going to be least stigmatized. And the brain care wording seems to be lesser stigmatized than something like brain treatment center or some of the other terminology in branding clinics. But one of the concepts with the Brain Care Performance Center is that some centers could have a location that was really just doing an EEG and providing a very simple feedback mechanism. It's a different report than what I've shown you on this Zoom that's much simpler without a physician review for the person. So more like a person could walk in, get a brainwave recording at a very low price point, more like $100. And in doing that, what some of the centers that have tried it are finding is that really starts to fill a MeRT machine, right? So you might do, James, I don't know how many people they've done to fill, for instance, 7 MeRT patient slots. But for instance, we know that one of the clinics has done a lot of these brainwave recordings, and that's keeping the MeRT machine full with patients for treatment. Whereas there's a lot of people that the doctor's never seeing doing just a very simple recording because they're interested to know, hey, what's my processing speed? How coherent is my brain function? I'm going to move to talking a little bit about this slide where I've put the cost of getting started. And in some ways, I hate putting things like this in writing, but this is just so that we can all see, what it looks like. When you merge with Wave Neuro, or if you decide to license a clinical site with Wave Neuro, this is what it looked like to start a new clinic. And in essence, you pay a license fee. Now that license fee contains within it your training for a physician and a neurotech. So that license fee is going to be, if you're going to start a clinic and you say, so in our case in Rancho Mirage, we started a clinic in Rancho Mirage. It covered my physician training and the training of one neurotech. That's enough for you then to start the clinic with your equipment. The equipment, you have 2 options. You have a purchase option, which we did not do. We actually leased, in our case, for a few years before we decided to purchase equipment. And so there are lease or financing options that come out to be approximately, some of them are a little lower than $2,500 a month, but I was trying to put the high end of what the outlay of cost might be. So if you were looking at your least point of entry to start a clinic, you could say it would be the $6,500 plus the $2,500. So $9,000 a month in your operational expenses outside of things like keeping the lights on and paying payroll. If you look at purchasing, it depends on which EEG system you buy. The DayMed wet cap is a little less expensive, and you would need it if you were going to treat kids. So it's between $12,000 and $15,000, whereas the Zeto dry cap is 20,000, and you just need the Zeto and its computer, and you get those two together. So that the EEG would be between 15 and 20 grand. The Mag Pro R30, which is the machine that does the treatment, is about 70,000, plus or minus. And there's a backlog that's shorter right now than it used to be. When we started, it was months before you could get a new machine. That they've ramped up production because of our company. When we look at income potential, in contrast to those costs, one patient generally would generate approximately $8,000 per month. So in our clinic, we charge just under $12,500 for 6 weeks of treatment. You can slice and dice that lots of different ways. One of the things that we're realizing is that a lot of our autistic kids do so well in 4 weeks that if they as a family can look at it as an $8,000 expenditure for 4 weeks, that's much more palatable than $12,000. And so, for instance, for our summer in our clinic right now, because kids are out of school and it's a prime time for us to treat our autistic community, we're letting them know we're happy to do a 1 month for $8,000. You know, it's actually 7,000 something. But in essence, what we're looking at in general is that it's about $8,000 of income per patient per month. Most patients treat for 6 weeks. And so in essence, you're going to have a patient with you for longer than a month. But if you're just trying to do rough numbers in expecting what you could generate from an income standpoint, if you had 5 patients a month, so imagine your day being an 8-hour day, whether you start at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning and go to 5. We generally are open 8 to 5 in our clinic, and we take a lunch break. We kind of consider ourselves full if we're above 6 patients for treatment. But you can imagine 5 times 8 is going to be 40,000 versus 10 times 8 is 80,000. And there's nuances to scheduling that would be things I would invite you to talk with us about or with James about if you really move forward to putting this in your clinic. You need room in your schedule to be able to do EEGs. And if you have one neurotech and one room, you can't do both an EEG and a treatment at the same time. And so you're going to need to leave space in your schedule to make that work. So for our beginning period of time, when we were using only one tech, we couldn't max out at 10 people a day because we would have had nowhere to put a new patient in to start. And you kind of shoot yourself in the foot if you don't plan for the next group of patients who's going to come in after this current treating group. So the nuances of scheduling are a good thing to talk to James or Robert about. I would tell you they're your experts in that realm. We've tried it different ways. We now have 2 techs, plus Robert has trained as a tech so that we have extra redundancy, and Robert will step in and do an EEG sometimes if our 2 techs are both busy. But there's a variety of ways that scheduling can work for you. But in most cases, each treatment is 35 minutes. So we're currently scheduling on the 45 minutes for our patients' treatments. Robert, are you scheduling an hour for a new patient for an EEG?
Only if it's peds.
Okay, if it's a kid.
Yeah.
Okay.
Adults we can get done in 45.
Right.
Even with dry cap, even faster, right?
Yeah.
30
Those
minutes.
that were at conference, we did EEGs. Jay Kumar, who works with the company as well and is really an expert in reviewing EEGs, came and did the EEGs at conference, and then I reviewed them, and he was fast. I mean, he could get them done in 10 minutes in many cases. So with the dry cap, it's a much faster turnaround on your EEGs. I want to just be present to the time. We're right at almost a minute to the hour. I'm going to try to wrap the main volume, and then I'm happy to stay on and answer questions and show you the video also here of our walkthrough here at the end. I want to just put up James and Ashley and Robert's email on the screen. Jay Wyatt, JWYATT at waveneuro.com is James that you've heard here on the call. He has some colleagues who work with him in the physician liaison group. Ashley at waveneuro.com will probably be the person who would send you the contract or the beginning paperwork if you were going to move forward. She'll work with you in creating that for your clinic. And then My Optimal Life is Robert's and my email. And that's a place that we welcome your questions. We want to be supportive, because what we're finding is that the more we collaborate with other doctors, the better our patient care becomes and the more it's fun. And so when we look at, you know, Robert and I sat back and said, okay, if we look at who we want to be working with, there's nobody more than the functional medicine group of physicians that has a like-minded mindset and really an underlying passion for patient health. And so we want more colleagues in this realm. I'm going to just close the PowerPoint for a moment or move it, and let me reshare my screen and show you a video that Robert prepped, and then I'll take the questions that I know are in the chat. Let's see here. Robert did a walkthrough just so you could see our clinic setup. And I want to show that to you because I think it gives you an idea of what a freestanding MeRT clinic could look like. And Robert, you know what's weird? It's on my desktop, but I can't see it to share it. So hang on. See what I can do. And Robert, if you want to see if you have it on your desktop, I can make you co-host. I just, for some reason, can't share the video.
I only have it on my phone.
Okay, hang on a second. I'm going to try one more time.
If James,
Bye, Tiffany. Or go ahead, Tiffany. Ask.
so if James is there, just a question: what area or population base do you feel that could support a device, like for the number of patients that would be needed?
As far as like city,
Yes, like the size.
I mean, it's really dependent on the like median income in that area, because that's a lot of like market analysis that we do when we have somebody that comes on or wants to come on board. There has to be a population, obviously, that's big enough to support this. I'm trying to think what location, like we have a location in Columbus, Ohio. That's not like Columbus. I don't know if anybody's from there or in that area, but it's not a big population and they're doing really well. So much so that that owner has moved and just opened a location in Cincinnati. And Cincinnati's not a very big city. So you don't necessarily need to be in a huge metropolitan city to have this work business wise, because the technology works. I've been doing this for 8 years and the technology will work, but it's a matter of getting those people in the door.
Right, because I'm based in Bermuda. We only have 60,000 people, but you know, it's a very small island, but we also have we have a wide range of demographic status, you know, because we have a lot of companies and everything that are here. So anyway, I was just kind of considering.
So I would love to jump on a separate call with you and strategize that, because that is intriguing. Because I think there's potential there for sure.
Sure, I'll drop you an email. I've got your details.
Yeah, perfect. Just to give you an idea, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Korea, but there's a little island off of Korea called Jeju Island, and it's kind of their vacation spot. Our location in Seoul is going to open a location on that island, and the population isn't very big, but it's a big destination for vacationers, and they go there for like a month at a time. So it's not really like, it's just giving you a sense of you can kind of do it anywhere as long as it makes sense, and I'm a big fan of making sense. So
Thanks.
yeah.
Thank you, James. I
James,
think, or go ahead,
James,
TJ.
along those same lines, what about, because I'm currently in Columbus, Ohio, but I'm considering a move back possibly to Hawaii on the island of Oahu. Is there already footprint there, or would that be a viable location?
Depends on where. We do have a location in Honolulu. So it would be, that's another thing, like we just want to be mindful of who's there already. Is there enough market demand to support multiple locations? That would just be some research we have to do. But no is never an answer until we go through all the equations.
And when you say do the research, do we have to pay you like a marketing analysis fee for that? Or how is that?
No, that's something I just enjoy doing on my own, and my team will help me with it. That's part of the service, because ultimately, like everybody that's on this call, our ultimate goal is to get this technology out to more people. But we also are understanding of what the commitment is to open one of these locations or add this into a location. And we take it serious. So we want everybody to be successful. So there's no extra adding fees on for market research, making sure that, no, we don't do that.
I think, James, wouldn't you say that in some ways it really depends both on a couple things as far as the marketing side of things? Like if you're well known in your community or you have a patient base in your community, like that, those two things make it really easy to open a clinic.
Yes. Yeah, like that's what I've seen. So I wanted to also say something before we get off this call. I am so excited to have this population working with our technology, because I'm a huge fan of how you guys approach medicine, and it aligns so well with what we do. But to go back to Dr. Brossfield's point, if you guys already have a patient pool and already have an established brand in your market, it makes it a lot easier to penetrate and get into that area with a new modality. We see it all the time.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like starting functional medicine. It's the same discussion, right? It's like if you have people that you have influence, that's going to make a big difference in the speed of your uptake in your clinic. But I also would say Robert has worked really hard in our area, and James is an expert at this as well, that when you look at how you market in an area, there's tons of ideas of how you can do that. We've tried to optimize SEO through a website, which now is generating some new patients into our clinic. But originally, I just referred from my ExoHealth patient or my ExoHealth practice. And in this picture, you can kind of get the idea. You see the picture on the far left, that door, I should say, is my ExoHealth practice. And the doors right straight in front of you in this picture are our brain care clinic. So initially, it was word of mouth and my patient referrals that filled our clinic. And I did a lot of speaking in country clubs and centers in our town. Now you can also work with autistic parent societies. If you're a psychiatrist, you have a ready-made patient population. One of the things that's happening right now with a new clinic that we've supported a dear friend of mine who's a psychiatrist in starting is that she is seeing, like, she's actually told me last night, she goes, you can't believe how useful having this EEG is turning out to be for my psychiatric practice, even though not everyone is going forward for MeRT treatment. Just understanding what's happening in their brain is a tool I've never had before. Like I've never been able to understand what was going on when they had an anxiety disorder, you know, because psychiatry or Western medicine has not had a modality to look at the brain state as the corollary to the diagnosis. So I'm excited to see it used in those ways, but I think the marketing side is very manageable, even in smaller centers, depending on your reach into the community. I'm just going to see what other question we have here. Let's see. Shada, thank you for your question. Are there other costs with a franchise aside from the monthly $6,500 if you purchase the equipment and other than salary of your neurotech? How long does it take to get started and do the marketing? So I would say, other than usual operations costs of a brick and mortar building and staff, no, I don't know. Robert, help me think or James, if there's anything else. So if you've paid your subscription fee, you've trained your physician and a neurotech within that fee, you've got to keep your doors open and you're going to pay your neurotech. I don't think there's other costs. Marketing,
No.
of course, you could expend whatever you choose in marketing, but
The 6,500 monthly fee, that's the only charge.
yeah. And with that 6,500, I want to say, not only do I have, you know, kind of, it's not fully unlimited. I'm sure there's a limit somewhere. If I was doing, I don't know, 60 EEGs or something a month, they'd probably tell me, hey, that's a lot. But there, it's kind of like for one machine functionality, you're fully covered for everything you need from Wave Neuro within that 6,500. So that means if we need IT help, Robert calls Ryan at Wave Neuro and we get help. Or if if we have an issue with our tech not being able to function, James, they have, you know, sort of a depth of field in the bench to help us with that. James is consistently troubleshooting for clinics all the time. So, you know, really, you've got somebody who has your back. How long does it take to get started? I'll just tell you what my experience was. I had some investors that helped me with my costs at the beginning, which helped us get off the ground cost-wise without having to purchase our equipment initially. So we were in a leasing arrangement. And then within 7 months, we were making profit. So what we did in that first 6 months was we did a ton of sort of speaking in the community, telling people about it. I was referring patients in from my clinic, and we were doing things like I identified who were influencers in the community that I wanted to work with. So for instance, the trainers at the country clubs in my town were all people that I happen to have had a former relationship with because of doing educational series in their centers. So I went to the trainers and said, hey, I'd love to give you 2 weeks of treatment on the house because I want you to have an experience understanding what this could do for performance for the people in your clubs. I want you to be able to speak to it. So I was really upfront with what I was trying to do, but they were all for it because they got 2 weeks of free treatment that improved their game at tennis or golf or whatever they do. So they wanted to do it. So I did that. We also have a policy in our clinic that is a 50% off for healthcare providers. So we are trying to treat our colleagues at a price that is a little bit more inviting, and we want them to know about it and refer patients. What else, Robert, in that first 6 months? We held a brain summit that was kind of like a collaborative event in the community where we invited other people to speak. Actually, we got Dale Bredesen to come and speak, which was huge because people were so interested in that. But we did several things to try to increase awareness in the community and provide some pro bono care, not the entire 6 weeks of treatment, but a taste. In 2 weeks, people notice a difference.
I would also say, Jeralyn, that, when we started in 2019, there were about 10 clinics, and today there's over 100. So just the brand awareness of Wave Neuro and what MeRT is much bigger. And like what's happening in Redlands with, helping Dr. Shepard's clinic is happening so much faster than it did when we started, so that just this company is exploding. So I think it's going to be
7 months is the long shot number.
Yeah, no, and there's lots of ways to go around that. Be a little quicker for sure.
I can tell you, our psychiatrist friend who just started a clinic, their clinic opened officially on May 9th. And so that's less than 6 weeks ago. She is almost full, and that's turning a profit. So, it's like it was almost immediate in her case because she has a clientele who has anxiety and depression. And she also has a psychologist in her clinic. So between the two of them, they really had quite a backlog of patients who needed this. Libby's asking, what's our visit cost per visit? Libby, it's so roughly, I would say $500. Robert's going to tell you he's my businessman, right? He's going to say that's not the right number.
It's not the right number.
Because what is it, Robert? Somewhere between 350 and 400?
Yeah.
We don't calculate it that way is the reason I don't know the number.
No, it's in a package, right? So you have 10 EEGs, you have 10 MeRT treatments, an EEG, and a visit with a doctor. So you have 12 visits. That's about $4,000. So, you can break that down however you want to, but it's low under 350.
We're charging cash, Robert, for someone to come in and just get an EEG and a consult with me, those two things, and they're going to pay cash just for that. We're right at 745.
Yeah, so clinics are between I don't know, between 500 and 750 for that, probably, depending on where you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we often, like, that's one of the things we can give away, right? So I did a talk at a tennis club in April, early April. We printed up certificates that said 50% off your EEG and consult. So for half that cost, they could come in and get an EEG and a consult, which was a very popular thing for people to do. It just popped our clinic number of EEGs for several weeks through the roof. And then out of that, we've been treating ever since the people that moved forward with treatment. And we have 4 lined up that when they come back to the desert in November, they're ready to treat. So I think that, yeah, you can kind of manipulate the numbers based on how you build your packages. I'm going to show this video and then
Can I ask one tech question before you go to the video?
Yeah.
So with the wet and dry caps, is there a difference in the quality of the treatment or the read that you get when you use one or the other?
What do you
James,
think,
you want to take
James?
that?
Yeah, no, there's not. And that's
Okay.
coming from Alex Ring, who's the director of the Department of Data Science with Wave. There's no difference.
They're finicky in different ways, right? As far as
Yeah.
getting a good read.
Yeah,
But they both
But-
work well.
yeah. The data that we get, it's perfectly fine, either or.
What I'm going to welcome everybody to do is email in any questions you have. I will happily send this recording to everybody that was on the Zoom. And certainly we're here to be resources. James is available for contact and support, and just let us know what your questions or interests are. I think, if we can start a dialogue, that's really that was our purpose with today. So I just want to say thank you for everybody's time, and I'm going to show a video that Robert did of walking through our office.
Hey, welcome to Dr. Brossfield's MeRT Clinic in Rancho Mirage. This is a little walkthrough to get an idea what a MeRT clinic might look like and what you might want to do. You'll see on the door, we use Brain Care Performance Center for our brand. Affiliates can use some of Brain Care's trademark branding if they qualify or want to do that. You also can use your own. This is our waiting room. In the little neon light and the wallpaper, that's all Brain Care branding. Little reception area here. As we enter the office, behind our reception area is something you may or may not need depending on the clientele you see. We have a little cap cleaning station here, so sink, metricide. In the desert, we don't need much, so we can just put the caps on wig stands and they dry in a few hours. Cap cleaning supplies in the cabinet above. If you're seeing peds patients, you'll need wet cap. If you have adult patients only, you can go dry cap and kind of avoid that part of the piece, that piece of the process. Little snack station here after treatment. So if people need a little glucose for a little pick-me-up. This is our EEG room. We have a cute little sign on the door. Hopefully people stay quiet while we're doing testing in here. We find using these basic IKEA chairs work really, really well for both treatment and for EEGs. And since we do wet cap, our prepping, cleaning, ear clips, etc., all in a little cabinet there to the right. Basically, you need a computer and the little head box is back behind that plugs into the cap. If you're doing a dry cap, a little simpler, but we do a standalone EEG room, so it lets us maximize our patient flow. And then treatment room number 1, we have a MagPro R30 in here for treatment, and one more over here. These rooms are both 10 by 11, and certainly if you're starting out, just to wrap up as another idea, a lot of clinics might just start with one room, and certainly if you're doing dry cap it'd be quite easy to utilize this room for both treatment and EEG. It would limit the number of patients you could see early on, but it would help you get started in a small space. Hey, welcome to Dr. Brock.
Sorry. But, well, I just want to say thank you to everybody for being on the Zoom. I see a couple more questions I'll answer. Vikran is asking, do I suggest eyes open and eyes closed qEEG? How long for each? Our standard is actually only eyes closed, and we do 10 minutes of recording. James, if you're welcome to add to that if you wish. I don't think, in all honesty, our lab, I think of our lab like miraculous. We'll have little kids that are wiggling and jumping around, and we're struggling to get a 10-minute EEG. And honestly, it adds a lot of fun and life to our clinic. But, you know, if we can get snippets of 2 to 5 minutes of EEG at a run, even if those are disjointed, our lab usually can work with that to create a report. So 10 minutes is the usual in answer to that. Libby, thanks for the art comments. Yeah, we love art, and we're all about neurons and visuals in our clinic. We do a lot of reinforcement. Just by the way, our techs, we've trained our techs to really, they're therapeutic in their interactions with our patients. It's a 35 minutes where you have a captive audience, and we talk a lot and work with sleep optimization and healthy habit optimization during that time that the patient's in the chair. And then, is the tech present with the patient the entire time? Yes. Now, I'll tell you, safety-wise, you really could walk out of the room. Like, once they're positioned, if they're not a child who's running around, you know, an adult is going to stay in position in the chair and be able to treat. I've run a staff meeting while I was getting treated. I've had 70 treatments myself for optimizing focus, and also countering my chemo effects after cancer. But really, yeah, the tech stays in the room. We kind of feel like that's a relationship that's sacred. And our techs ask scaled questions every day. So they take a scaled question and answer on anxiety, pain, irritability, and depression of each patient daily that we track, as well as talking with the patient about reinforcing sleep habits and how much they slept and what are they seeing. A lot of times we're hearing stories that we frequently cry tears in our clinic of joy and process and change with patients, because we're hearing parents say, Robert, you want to tell the story about our little guy who sat for dinner last week? People tell us incredible stories, and our tech is either going to write that down or put it into the record, because those are the stories of transformation.
Yeah, well, back to the tech being there, the tech being in communication with the family and the patient, they get those firsthand narratives, right? And they chart that. So we have a little boy that's autistic and drives his mother crazy. I mean, this little guy is a ball of energy, is constantly at his mother 24/7, like just nonstop. And when you're around it, you're like, oh, he really does drive her nuts. And so he, about his 3rd or 4th day into treatment, she goes, you know what? Last night, what happened? That little guy came to dinner and sat down and ate his dinner like a 50-year-old man.
She was so happy.
She goes, this is amazing. So anyway, those are the kind of things that, you know, the patient, I'll hear laughter sometimes in the room. It's often my tech hearing stories, but you know, we're interacting with, recording those firsthand stories. And honestly, the leads often come from those as well, because they'll talk about, oh yeah, and I told my friend and they're interested, and okay, and the tech will take that information, pull it to me, make sure we follow up with that if it's appropriate. And honestly, probably half of our patients come from our patients now at this point. So that's an important piece as well with the neurotech.
For sure. Vikran was asking if the tech interaction with the patient changes the qEEG recording. Yes, that's an exception to what we're just talking about interaction. During the EEG, there's no interaction unless it's to keep the patient awake. We don't want the patient to go into a deep meditative state or sleep, because that does change the quality of the EEG. We want the tech basically monitoring the patient and not speaking to them unless it's just a slight encouraging statement, like sometimes Robert or Crystal will say, you've got 2 minutes left, you're doing great. or let's make sure you're not falling asleep. And that's about the amount of interaction that they might get through the 10-minute EEG. So all the rest of what we're talking about is in the treatments. When they're in the chair for the magnetic treatment, you can definitely talk with them. You can, for our kids, Robert, do you want to describe how you treat an autistic child who is not sitting still? You're on mute, babe.
No, it depends on the child. When we had kids where we clear the room and the wand has an extension to it, and we'll give them whatever they'd like to play with. And when the little bell goes off, the coil goes to the head. We usually treat PEDS, PZ, FPZ, front and two location. And the kids get used to it. After a while, the bell goes off, and sometimes they'll just put their little head up like this, and they're ready to go. And they'll go back and play it again. They have the rhythm to it, and many of the kids like the feeling. So they get used to it. It's honestly, I don't know, it's not too difficult. I mean, we have some kids that it's a little more challenging, but
Robert or the parent will usually grab the child by the shoulders and just hold them within the range that the tech can touch them with the coil. So it becomes a little bit of an interactive sport. And it's quite interesting to watch sometimes. I'll come over and I'll just observe. But we may fill the room with balloons if it's a kid that needs something to do or movement. But Robert, as they move around, Robert will just hold them still, or the parent will hold them still while Crystal applies the coil to the head, and it works well. So, our little kids, we've treated as young as age 3. You could theoretically, we've done an EEG on a late 2-year-old. It was all dependent on if the child could sit still in the parent's lap. So, in autistic children, a lot of times the earlier you can treat, the better. And, we find that the mix of patients is actually lovely in our clinic. It gives everybody a different energy with each different patient type that is more manageable just as far as the load for us as caregivers and providers. Tiffany had one more question here. For MDD and OCD, what percentage will insurance cover? Robert, I'll let you answer that. I think it's just the copay that they don't cover, right? Yeah,
I mean, we have a little bit of experience with that, but they tend to cover as well as, we end up getting reimbursed about as well as we do for, and it depends on the insurance the patient has, I guess. We don't have a ton of experience, but we do get reimbursed at or above what we're charging now cash from insurance when we've been paid. The patient might be responsible. I'm just the one we're seeing now. I think she'll pay a little over $1,000 out of pocket herself, and we'll receive somewhere in the $12,000 to $14,000 range, I believe, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it does vary, but so we're each insurance company is a little bit different, but they are reimbursing, like Jeralyn said, as much or better than what we are getting with cash. So it's a little honeymoon period.
And I think their copays, if they have a copay, it's a usual copay. It's like a $35 or something, and they may have a deductible and stuff that comes into play with that. But the amount that the insurance companies are reimbursing right now is so significant that even if you never got the patient to pay all the copays, you're going to make as much or more as your cash pay patients just from the insurance reimbursement usually. Okay. I thank you for being on this call. I'm putting the 2 emails up on the screen in the chat just so that you have them if you didn't catch them when they were on the screen earlier. And I just appreciate everybody's time. Thank you. I hope that everybody has a good week, and we'll talk later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.